Edward Gibbon Fall of Rome Part 5. We discussed in the last video the rise of Emperor Severus after killing his rivals. Gibbon commented that Severus had conceded a little to admit that in order to be nice, he first had to be cruel. Severus derived his victory from the legions, so he rewarded them with gratitude and a terrible new policy. Severus eased military discipline, increased the salaries of the legions, and increased the number of Praetorian guards, relying on regional recruits instead of soldiers from Italy. The goal of Severus was to create a new Praetorian Guard that would be considered representative of the entire army and remain loyal to him and his family. Gibbon saw that Severus could not discover or did not want to recognize the usefulness of maintaining a medium power no matter how imaginary it was between the emperor and the army. In other words, Severus acted more like a military dictator than as an executive politician adhering to the republican traditions of Rome. As a result, there was a decline in the power of the Senate, and the idea that the emperor was at least subject to the restriction of civil laws weakened. Gibbon mentioned that Emperor Severus had a desire to establish a dynasty. Severus married Julia Domina, a woman of royal descent from the region of Syria. Gibbon describes her as a patron of all art and a friend to every genius man. She gave birth to twins Geta and Caracalla, and Severus made them his partners in power. However, the twins hated each other and were not ready to take control of the empire. To give them experience in real warfare, Severus took them with him in an attempt to conquer modern Scotland. According to Scottish mythology, Roman armies fought the local Scottish tribes. During the war, Severus fell ill. When Severus was dying in Britain, he urged the army to declare Caracalla and Geta as co-rulers, but the two brothers only spoke in public. Imperial advisors persuaded them to divide the empire. The European and West African parts went to Caracalla, while Asia and Egypt went to Geta. The idea led to resentment among the Romans. Caracalla proposed to meet with his brother for further negotiations, and they met in his private apartment where some of Caracalla's guards killed Geta, who died in his mother's arms. After that, Caracalla rushed to the Praetorian guards, who preferred Geta for emperor. Caracalla claimed that Geta tried to kill him and buried Geta honorably, but Caracalla ordered the execution of Geta's allies and threatened to kill his mother because she grieved for him publicly. To satisfy the Roman people, Caracalla imposed heavy taxes to pay for theatrical performances and new palaces. At the same time, he punished the strikes in the Egyptian city of Alexandria with a massacre in which thousands of residents were killed. Despite everything, Caracalla was popular among the army because he raised their salaries more and dressed and behaved like ordinary soldiers. Caracalla's tyrannical rule came to an end when, fearing that he would be executed because of suspicions of conspiring against Caracalla's life, the commander of the Praetorian Guard, Macrinus, persuaded a soldier named Martialis to assassinate the emperor. Martialis was killed immediately, and the Senate and the regional legions declared Macrinus as the new emperor. Macrinus became the first emperor who did not descend from the Senate class, but from the rank of knights. Macrinus soon named his son Diogumenian as co-emperor. Macrinus planned to gradually reverse the changes that Caracalla made to the army. Unfortunately, Macrinus made a mistake in keeping the army gathered in Syria. When they realized their power and that Macrinus was planning to lower the army's salaries, the army waited for an opportunity to choose a new emperor. They found 1,000 voices in a child named Elagabalus, Julia Domina's nephew. A rumor spread that Elagabalus was actually the son of Caracalla, whose popularity among the army was still strong. Macrinus' army fought a battle against some of the forces that defected to Elagabalus's side and lost. After escaping from the battle, Macrinus and his son were captured and killed. Elagabalus took the name of the Syrian sun god for himself, as he was a hereditary high priest. With a great religious procession, Elagabalus offered the worship of the sun god to Rome. Gibbon saw stories of Elagabalus's sexual transgressions as hard to believe. He considered that such behavior was more common among the imperial elite because the nobles of Rome lived without restrictions. The army was disgusted with its new emperor and began to turn to his cousin Severus Alexander, the grandson of Julia Maesa. After Elagabalus angered the soldiers by spreading a false rumor about Alexander's death and his attempt to crush a rebellion, the soldiers killed both Elagabalus and his mother Julia Suemias. The Senate obediently declared that the humble and obedient 17-year-old Severus Alexander was the emperor. Gibbon wrote that Rome was not like the monarchies in Europe. In his time, where the noble spirit of chivalry and the law of succession allowed women to become queens while at the same time preventing them from civil and military service. Because of these circumstances, Julia Mamaea, Alexander's mother, had difficulty claiming imperial authority as a trustee. However, she was influential in enacting a law that prevented women from entering the Senate, but she took the essence of power, not its appearances. In other words, she was disguised in directing politics in the name of her son. However, Gibbon admitted that she ruled wisely, so she established an advisory board from the Senate and removed Elagabalus's favorites from the government administration. At the same time, Alexander received a philosophical education where he was taught that serving humanity was the most acceptable form of worship to the gods. While Julia Mamaea and Alexander were successful in cleaning up the administration, they were afraid to deal with the army. Instead, Alexander tried a lackluster picture of discipline by visiting the sick and wounded soldiers personally and showing gratitude for the achievements of the army. When one of the ministers named Ulpian, who tried to reform the army, was killed by a Praetorian guard named Epigothus, and at the present of Alexander and his mother, Emperor Alexander only reacted by sending Epigothus away from Rome. Another time, the rebellious soldiers threatened the emperor himself, and the emperor was forced to order the soldiers to disperse the rebellion strictly. Gibbon says Alexander's administration was a futile struggle against the corruption of his time. The tyranny of Commodus and the civil war that followed his fall, and the fact that the Severus's dynasty had enlarged the army and increased its salaries made the army more dangerous. Gibbon also referred to Caracalla extension of Roman citizenship to all the free inhabitants of the empire. When reflecting on earlier Roman history, Gibbon argued that after Rome expanded into resource-rich or wealthy regions such as Spain and Egypt, Augustus established a system in which provincial wealth was sent to Italy, but a large part of it was returned to hardworking provinces through the gentle influence of commerce and the arts. The Romans paid a tax on goods, especially luxuries, from the provinces, and used this tax in addition to property and inheritance taxes to fund the army. By extending citizenship to all inhabitants of the Roman provinces, those tax obligations were expanded. Also, these reforms severed the old relationship between citizenship and military service. As a result, Italians began to work mostly as judges and lawyers, while the army ranks were filled with soldiers from the border provinces who knew no country except their camp, no knowledge except war, no civil laws, and barely any military discipline laws. To be continued. Thank you for watching.